I get some analysis on the situation with Leonid Petrov, a senior lecturer at the International College of Management in Sydney and visiting fellow at the Australian National University. Thanks for joining us on this news hour. So, Leonid, we see the death toll rising from that attack in eastern Ukraine. Do you think anger is also going to rise in Russia over the soldiers who were killed, especially given the reason from Moscow that the use of banned cell phones was to blame?
Well, it looks like Russia is going through a major, process of disintegration at the moment. The chaos is prevailing. Hundreds of thousands of people have already, male of conscription age, have already left the country. Those who could not or decided to volunteer to end this agony decided to go to the front line, expecting that the war would finish soon. So what we saw immediately in the aftermath of this strike, Ukrainian force strike, and the annihilation of dozens, maybe hundreds of conscripted Russian men is very difficult to establish, because Russian propaganda is claiming that there's 60 or 80 of them who have died. But we know that apparently 350,000 of conscripts have been caught and shanghaied into the eastern Ukraine with the purpose of destroying, killing, and conquering Ukraine. So at the moment, it's very difficult to establish at what stage this process, this campaign is going on. And the widows and the parents who are mourning the dead ones are also very confused about what happened, because they don't blame Vladimir Putin, who started this mess, and it's a huge disaster not only for Ukraine but for Russia. Also, they simply blame the mobile phones. They simply blame the command chain, which has been broken, and for some reason all the conscripts were put into the one dwelling, including the explosives, so which completely annihilated those troops who have not been trained, who have not been prepared, and have not been told what is going to happen to them. So it's a very murky situation from the Russian perspective, and it looks like Vladimir Putin and his cronies are benefiting from this confusion, because they simply blame the West, they blame the NATO and Ukrainians for causing those disaster after disaster which Russian army is currently experiencing.
So while Putin and his cronies, as you describe them, are blaming the West, it does seem that much of Russia, from what you're saying, and the families of those young soldiers who died are actually blaming Russia's military. What does that then tell us about the attitude towards the military, which hasn't always been a very united front since this conflict started?
Well, you mentioned young soldiers. I don't think that all of them were young, because people of all ages, since Vladimir Putin announced the so-called limited mobilization in late September, people simply being snatched on the streets and conscripted from elsewhere, including the prisons. The criminals have been armed and sent to the front line with a promise to be pardoned as a result of probably 6 months after their service. But nobody survived 6 months in the eastern in that front line, which stretched for thousands of kilometers. The active front line is about 1,500 kilometers long, which is extremely difficult for Ukraine to sustain, but for Russia it's equally deadly. So what Russians simply expect from this, when their loved ones are being sent to the front line, the families are expecting some monetary remuneration in case they're killed, or a brand new motor vehicle, a car, a limousine car, perhaps going to be sent to their families. That's what they expect. But once the soldier, the member of the family, vanishes and simply evaporates on the Ukrainian front, nobody gets the money. So that naturally makes people angry, and sooner or later the Kremlin is going to face questions, including from those who deserted from the front line. And we saw that the Wagner Group deserters are already now being searched for by the Russian authorities, about 6 or 7 people with weapons. left the front line. Where they are, nobody knows. Perhaps they will show up in some way on the streets of Moscow, and then the process of Russian disintegration, Russian empire collapse will enter its final phase.
So many questions, so few answers at this stage. Leonid Petrov, thank you so much for your analysis.
Thank you for it.